Welcome to the KuppingerCole Analyst Chat. I'm your host. My name is Matthias Reinbart. I'm lead advisor and senior analyst with KuppingerCole. My guest today is Martin Kuppinger. He is the founder and the principal analyst here at KuppingerCole. Hi, Martin. Good to see you.
Hi, Matthias. Pleasure to be back here in this talk.
Great to have you. And we have a topic, and actually I have to read it out because it's too long to remember. We want to talk about the need for policies and automation to secure your agile and dynamic IT environment. There is a strong claim in there. Let's start with this need for automation and policies. How is this reflected, and is this a new thing in IT?
I think we can answer with yes and no here. So we see the tendency to automation for decades. We have policies around for decades and that's, I think, where the problem starts in many, many areas. So there are firewall policies. There are whatever automated configurations of system environments. There are a lot of things which are sometimes relying on policies, which are sometimes automated. But I think when we look at what is happening in today's IT, we are not consequent and consistent enough in using automation and policies across everything.
But when you look at this automation and the areas that you mentioned, then and that could be something that is an automated rule within identity provisioning. That could be something that a developer creates when creating DevOps environment, firing up and shutting down dynamic environments. These are different people. These are different responsibilities. It's really difficult and really a challenge to get a grasp on what's happening across these areas, especially when you need to keep track of this, when you are a regulated environment, when you are a company that needs to prove in the end what your systems are doing. How can we attack, or how can we tackle this challenge?
Yeah, I think that leads us to a couple of interesting points. And I think we need to deconstruct this a little. So when we, for instance, say DevOps, based on microservices architectures, so services talking with other services via APIs, via application programming interfaces, running on a container platform such as Kubernetes, that again runs on an infrastructure as a service environment, then and managed by development tools, managed by when you look at this DevOps, then you see, okay, there are so many different tools involved already by a ton of DevOps tools in the DevOps tools chain. Then we have a couple of different areas. For instance, when we look at it from a security perspective. So who is allowed to do what in the DevOps tools chain with the various tools? How do we manage the resources on infrastructure as a service? How do we secure the API-based communication? How do we secure what is happening within the application itself and the privileged access to the application? So the entitlements within the application. As you said, yes, there are, on one hand, various peoples being responsible for parts of that entire agile IT. And there are various elements we need to secure. So we have the developers, and we all know that many developers, maybe most developers, are not very keen on putting security at the forefront in what they are doing. They develop, and security quite frequently is more an afterthought. We have the infrastructure people, and it's not only infrastructure as a service. It might be your own internal IT environment we're talking about. So it can run in different environments. It's not necessary that you use your Kubernetes only in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform or somewhere else. It might be that you run it in your private cloud or in your data center. So it's even bigger here. And that means, yes, we have quite a range of places where we need to manage and automate, and we have different responsibilities. The challenge I see is that I believe it would be rather naive to assume that someone can do everything. So you create the code and you create the scripts or the declarations that ensure that the infrastructure is sort of working the way you need it for that application, and you care for security. That never worked. And so we need to figure out ways how we can do that better. The challenge is in a dynamic environment, this can't be done manually by 3 different teams. So we end up with the need for thinking, how can we do it better? And I see 2 elements of the answer, which are automation and policies that work hand in hand across everything.
But that also means that IT organizations have to adapt to this different kind of thinking, so that you understand where policies are defined, how they are consumed, how they are enforced later, and how these individual building blocks within an organization, not within IT, play well together, that at every time these policies are understood, consumed, enforced, and really executed during the existence of infrastructure, during the running of a process. So this really needs to change, because everyone needs to be clear that the infrastructure, be it code, be it Docker container, Kubernetes network, is defined and designed according to the current valid policies. And I think only at that moment it's possible to get to this level of automation. So really people have to change their way of thinking. That would be one question. And on the other hand, what are we really looking at? I think the term entitlements is something that came up again. But an entitlement for me is the combination of identities plus their access. So no matter what kind of identity it is always the combination of somebody, be it a device, a process, something, and their ability to execute their access rights. And these 2 combinations, on the one hand, identity plus access equals entitlement, and the management of these entitlements via policies and automation. That is the way we should think of. Am I right?
So you're definitely right with entitlements. So something or someone is entitled to do something, which is, by the way, the foundation of every policy. Policy is a subject, so the someone or something is entitled, the action, to do something on a certain object. This is the standard structure. There might be then constraints added, but at the end, this is exactly what a policy looks like. Every policy is always about this structure, regardless of if you look at a firewall policy or a dynamic authorization policy in identity management or other types of policies. It is always that structure. There are different levels of policies. So for firewalls, we're talking about ports and IP ranges and stuff like that. At other levels, we just say all employees can access whatever this area of our corporate intranet, if you still use the term corporate intranet or something like that. So the level varies, but the structure of the policy is the same. The interesting thing is, I believe that we can, in many areas, we can derive lower level policies in an automated or in a defined manner. So automation based on certain policies and rules, so to speak. We can derive lower level policies from higher level policies. We can automate a lot around that if we do it right. And I think this is part of that. The other thing is what you brought up. if we have a complex challenge here in all these entitlements and across the organization, I think this is what we do in many areas of IT over time. A lot of solutions in IT came up because we learned doing it manually is cumbersome, is inefficient, is error prone. So when I go back to one of our core domains, which is identity and access management, the identity provisioning world evolved because creating accounts and assigning entitlements manually appeared to be not the right way in large organizations. That was fine when you had one mainframe and very few users. The more applications, the more systems you had, the more you had to move into something which was automated. Unfortunately, maybe not as, at least formally policy-based as it could be. In fact, a role and entitlements are nothing else than some translation of policies into sort of entitlements. But at the end, the answer was policies. The answer was automation. And this is the same when you look at tools in the network management space, when you look at other areas. It's always then trying to automate. And when you work with infrastructure as a code, when you work with declarative or scripted approaches, in some way it's the try to shift into automation, and it's shifting into automation. It might in that case be more policy based and less scripted, less manual declarations, but that is a relatively simple step to do. So at the end, regardless of which areas we look at, it goes always to policies, and automation are in some way a proven answer, but we didn't do it sort of consequently and integrated enough so far. And to your point of organization, I'm not sure whether I don't think this is a final answer, maybe, but I'm reluctant to say we need to fundamentally change the IT organization here. So we will not have people. Usually, we only have very few people who understand all areas. So I understand security better than infrastructure management, than today's development. So my days of development are pretty much in the past. So I'm not a super expert in all three areas. You will rarely find people who are super experts in all areas. And so you can't build an organization that says, okay, people understand everything. So you need the specialists, and you need to bring them together and make them work together. The question is, should you create different teams? But then again, how do you ensure that the way you deal with infrastructure, you deal with security, is consistent across the entire organization? So I believe it's more saying, where can we automate? Where do we maybe even get at least partially rid of certain requirements? So the more we automate the way we consume and we manage infrastructure, the less need there is for infrastructure specialists. So that will be a change, but I'm not sure whether we really must fundamentally change the organization.
What I meant with changing the organization was making sure that, for example, the DevSecOps does not have to know each of these three aspects, Dev, Sec, and Ops, but is capable of consuming well-defined, for example, security policies, to integrate them, to automate them without having to care too much about them, just to make sure they are there, they are enforced, they are well-defined, and they apply to what I create as a developer, as an operations guy or girl. I think that is the important stuff, so that we really can make sure that the individual expertise of the individual partners in the game is leveraged at the possible highest level, and that things work together by achieving automation and by defining and making available well-defined policies for automation. I think that may be a starting point.
I think here we are I think on we agree. I think the point is when you look at DevSecOps, which is a known term, but not a super well-known term across all the involved people. This Dev and Sec also comes probably more from DevSec than from SecOps in that terminology. So secure operations and securing the operations is a theme which is increasingly visible, where new capabilities such as cloud infrastructure entitlement management come in to say we tackle this challenge of sort of secure operations in an agile IT as a capability which adds to this bigger picture. On the other hand, we have this DevSec thing, and DevSec done right is not about saying developers become the super experts in security, but it is about saying there are services, there are APIs. So in fact, there are REST APIs or whatever else, which deliver the security, the identity capabilities to be easily consumed in development, so that developers just need to know, okay, if I need to register a user, this is the way I do it. This is the way I authenticate a user. This is the way I ask for an authorization. But I don't care about the details. So in fact, it's not about saying I integrate this, but I have a clear segregation where someone delivers the security and identity services, exposes it via APIs, as we have in our identity fabrics paradigm, the identity API layer, so that the developer just can consume that, doesn't need to think much about it, and has something that works well. And I think this is the point behind that, it's more about segregating at the right point. But policies then can be something which sort of are a common glue because they affect all areas. And then the specialists are more into responsibility to translate, where sort of a manual mapping, manual translation of higher level to lower level policies is required.
Right. And I think the answer to this massively evolving, getting more dynamic, getting more agile of this IT infrastructure that we have today, the answer to the issues that come up from that can only be the same level of getting more dynamic and agile when it comes to automating and providing the right policies. It's necessary to be as fast with creating policies and automation as the infrastructure and the changing areas of infrastructure require, as we mentioned them in the beginning, from on-prem, from traditional machines to dynamical infrastructures like Kubernetes and Docker infrastructure, up to highly orchestrated and really just ephemeral infrastructures that exist only for a few minutes to cover some additional workloads. All this needs to be well defined, well automated, and only in that situation you can deal properly with these kinds of infrastructures.
I would partially disagree with what you just said, because you said we need to be very dynamic in creating policies and the automation. I think the point is automation helps us to deal with the dynamic nature of our IT. So the policy is relatively stable, at least at a higher level, and that helps us to deal with this the dynamic nature of IT. And it's the same we have seen in identity. So when you manually manage all the static entitlements, it's very hard to follow the agile but not so super agile nature of an organization even. The more you go into policy-based access, the easier it is to follow change, because changing a policy is relatively simple. Changing hundreds of roles and tens of thousands of entitlements is way more complex. So I think it is to cope with the dynamic nature of IT, with the agile IT of today, and also that's the other side of the things, the complexity of the environments. We need a higher level of policies and automation. because we're not just talking about infrastructure as a service, we're talking about so many different environments. And going back to my analogy of identity management, when you had very few systems where you need to manage a few users, it was simple. With every additional application and sort of a growing number of IT users, the problem of provisioning arises because people weren't able to manage this manually anymore. So there was a need for automation and to a certain degree of policies, maybe not as mature as it is today or could be, but at the end, it's the same story here.
Okay, so now we've come full circle to the beginning of this episode. So we are again at the need for policies and automation to get a grip on the agile and dynamic nature of our IT infrastructure as of today. So I think that's a great point to stop this episode and to catch up on that again in a further episode when it gets to creating more tangible solutions for getting to policies and automation in real life systems, and to talk more about that in a further episode. Until then, thank you very much, Martin, for being my guest today.
Welcome.
And looking forward to the next episode coming up soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.